In the aftermath of the American Revolution, a nation newly born stood uncertain, raw, and filled with promise. 13 colonies had fought together against an empire, yet victory brought not unity, but a question: what now? The United States of America existed only in name, its future resting on fragile foundations and divided loyalties. Each state saw itself as sovereign, with its own currency, armies, and ambitions. The Articles of Confederation, the first attempt at governance, offered little more than a loose alliance, an experiment barely holding together. Amid this early chaos, the economy crumbled. Trade between the states faltered under conflicting tariffs, debt mounted, and foreign powers watched with interest, waiting for the young republic to collapse under its own weight. Farmers struggled, soldiers went unpaid, and the dream of liberty began to feel like a mirage, fading in the heat of disillusionment. The ideals of independence, freedom, equality, representation clashed with the brutal realities of a nation still searching for its identity. Then came a storm of rebellion. In Massachusetts, the fields of the countryside turned into battlegrounds once again. Farmers, burdened by taxes and debts they could not pay, rose in anger against a system that seemed to betray the very cause they had fought for. It was not Britain they fought this time, it was their own government. The rebellion was a warning, a cry echoing through the states that the foundations of the new republic were far from stable. As the smoke cleared, one truth became undeniable. The nation needed order, structure, and a vision that could unite its people. From this uncertainty emerged a call for something greater, a new constitution that would define what America would become. The men who would answer that call were not ordinary. They were thinkers, warriors, and statesmen who understood that liberty could not survive without law, and independence meant little without unity. It was the summer of 1787 when delegates from across the states gathered in Philadelphia. They came with conflicting interests, wary of power yet desperate for stability. Among them stood figures whose names would echo through time: George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, Benjamin Franklin, and James Madison. Inside the stifling heat of Independence Hall, they faced a monumental task: to rebuild the nation's foundation from the ground up. What took place behind those closed doors would determine not only the future of a young America, but the fate of democracy itself. For in that room, ideas clashed, tempers flared, and compromises were forged, not in comfort, but in necessity. The world was watching, though it did not yet know it. America was about to create something no nation had attempted before: a republic built on the rule of the people, not the crown. As the days turned into weeks inside the sweltering halls of Philadelphia, debates raged over the kind of nation that would rise from the ashes of uncertainty. The air was thick with tension and the scent of ink and sweat. Men argued not for power, but for principles that would shape generations. Some, like Hamilton, envisioned a strong central government, believing that without unity and control, the United States would crumble like every failed republic before it. Others, like Thomas Jefferson, though absent from the convention, feared too much power in one place, wanting that liberty itself could be devoured by tyranny from within. The question loomed large: how much authority should the federal government hold? And how could freedom be protected if that power grew too great? These were not just political questions, they were moral ones. The delegates faced the impossible task of finding balance between liberty and order, between the will of the people and the necessity of governance. At the center of this struggle stood James Madison, a quiet man with a sharp mind and a vision as wide as the continent itself. It was Madison who arrived with a bold idea, the Virginia Plan. It proposed a government divided into three branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. Each would have the power to check the other, ensuring no single branch could rise above the rest. It was revolutionary, yet also deeply pragmatic, a structure designed not for angels, but for men. The debates were fierce. Representation became the next battlefield. Large states demanded influence proportional to their population, while smaller states feared being swallowed by their size. The conflict nearly tore the convention apart until Roger Sherman of Connecticut proposed a compromise: two chambers of Congress, the House of Representatives based on population, and the Senate, granting equal voice to each state. The Great Compromise saved the Union before it was even born, but shadows still lingered. The question of slavery hung heavy in the air, a moral wound the delegates could not heal. In hushed tones and reluctant agreements, they chose to delay the reckoning, embedding a contradiction into the heart of their new nation. Freedom was declared universal, yet denied to millions. It was a choice that would haunt America for centuries. Through months of debate, argument, and fragile compromise, a document began to take shape, a constitution that would serve not as a mere law, but as a living promise. It spoke of "we the people," uniting the states under one banner, one purpose, and one destiny. It gave power to the people, but also protected them from their own government. It was a delicate balance of ideals and reality, of ambition and restraint. By September 1787, exhaustion had set in. Some delegates had left, others refused to sign. But those who remained, 39 men, placed their signatures on the parchment that would define a nation. When Benjamin Franklin was asked what kind of government they had created, he replied, "A republic, if you can keep it." His words were not a boast, but a warning. For this new nation was not built on the permanence of kings or the rigidity of empires. It was built on the fragile trust of its people. Outside, as the news spread through the streets, citizens wondered if this experiment could truly last. The Constitution was not yet law. It had to be ratified by the states. And as that battle began, the true test of America's endurance was only just beginning. Ratification ignited a new war, not of muskets or cannons, but of words, pamphlets, and persuasion. Across taverns, courthouses, and newspapers, Americans took sides in a fierce debate over the Constitution's fate. For some, it was a beacon of order. For others, a threat to the very liberty they had bled for just years before. The Federalists, led by figures like Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay, argued that the Constitution would bring stability to a fractured nation. In a series of essays that would become known as the Federalist Papers, they defended the principles of the new government with precision and passion. Hamilton wrote that without unity, we are already undone. Madison countered fears of tyranny by explaining how the system of checks and balances would prevent any one branch from seizing total power. But the anti-Federalists saw things differently. They feared that the Constitution created a government too distant, too powerful, one that could trample the rights of individuals and states alike. Men like Patrick Henry warned, "I smell a rat." They demanded clearer protections for personal freedoms, a written guarantee that liberty would never bow to authority. This battle between fear and hope defined the young republic's future. Ratification conventions met across the states, where arguments filled the air like powder smoke. In Massachusetts, tension reached its peak until a crucial compromise was struck. The Constitution would be accepted, but only with the promise of future amendments, a Bill of Rights, to safeguard the people. It was a concession that turned the tide. One by one, the states began to ratify. Delaware was the first, proud to be the spark of unity. Pennsylvania followed, then New Jersey, Georgia, and Connecticut. Yet resistance lingered. In New York and Virginia, two of the most powerful states, the debate raged bitterly. Hamilton and Madison fought not with swords, but with intellect and conviction, urging their fellow citizens to see beyond fear. In June 1788, New Hampshire became the 9th state to ratify, officially making the Constitution the law of the land. But the struggle was not over. Without New York and Virginia, the new government would lack both legitimacy and strength. For weeks, both states teetered on the edge of rejection. Finally, Virginia's decision came first, ratifying with the same call for amendments. In July, New York followed suit by a narrow vote. The United States was no longer a dream, it was a reality. In the months that followed, Congress convened in the new capital, New York City. The machinery of government began to turn, and the first elections were held. All eyes turned to one man, the war hero who had led them to victory and embodied the nation's ideals. George Washington was unanimously chosen as the first president of the United States. When he took the oath of office on April 30th, 1789, standing on the balcony of Federal Hall, the crowd below erupted in cheers. For a brief moment, every argument, every doubt, every fear seemed to vanish in the face of something larger, a shared belief that a free people could govern themselves. Washington's steady hand and humble presence gave the Constitution life, transforming parchment into power and ideals into reality. Yet beneath the celebration, the nation still trembled on uncertain ground. The challenges were immense: crushing war debt, foreign threats, and divisions between states. The ink on the Constitution was dry, but the work of democracy had only just begun. America stood not as a finished masterpiece, but as an experiment, one that could succeed only if its people chose to protect it, nurture it, and hold it accountable. And in those first fragile years, as new laws were passed and the Bill of Rights was drafted, the vision of a nation, conceived in liberty and tested by debate, finally began to breathe. Yet even as the ink settled, the contradictions of this new democracy lingered. Slavery persisted, inequality endured. The founders had planted a seed of liberty, but it would take generations for that seed to grow beyond the soil of compromise and conflict. The Constitution was a promise, imperfect but alive, a framework meant to evolve, to adapt, to be challenged by those who would come after. Across the Atlantic, monarchs and ministers watched with disbelief. Could a nation truly survive without a king? Could laws, rather than bloodlines, hold an empire together? America became both an experiment and a warning. Its success would inspire revolutions. Its failure would prove the skeptics right. George Washington's presidency set the tone. He refused to be called Your Majesty, choosing instead the humble title, Mr. President. When offered a third term, he declined, stepping away from power voluntarily, a gesture unheard of in his time. In that moment, Washington gave the young republic something more precious than victory, a precedent for peace, and a reminder that true leadership meant knowing when to let go. As years passed, storms would rise, political factions emerged, foreign wars threatened from afar, and internal divisions cut deep. But through every crisis, the Constitution held. It bent, but did not break. It adapted, but did not yield. From the ashes of colonial rule, the United States had forged something revolutionary, a nation bound not by ancestry or empire, but by an idea that all are created equal, and that power belongs to the governed. And though centuries have passed since those fragile first steps, the echoes of that founding struggle still resound. The debates, the divisions, the hopes, they live on in every generation that dares to question, to build, to believe. The story of America is not one of perfection, but of persistence. It is the story of a people forever chasing their own promise, sometimes stumbling, sometimes soaring, but always moving forward. In the end, the Constitution was never just a document. It was a mirror reflecting both the nation's greatness and its flaws. It reminded the world that freedom is not granted. It is earned, defended, and redefined by each generation. And so, as the sun rose over the new republic, casting light on a flag still wet with dew, the message was clear. This was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of the American experiment, an unfinished symphony of liberty, written not by heroes of the past, but by those still willing to dream of a more perfect union.